In this video, I'll be explaining how to complete each county's BMP data report spreadsheet. Instructions are at the top.
When you open up the BMP spreadsheet, you'll see several tables, like is displayed here. You have the ability to edit any of the data in the BMP spreadsheet, but the only sections that you need to edit are in the yellow boxes in each of the tables, as is stated in the instructions. This spreadsheet is designed to capture county information on best management practices, BMPs, that reduced nitrogen loss from cropping systems that were implemented in the last crop year. The 3 BMPs we can count towards nitrogen reduction credit include unfertilized, unharvested cover crops, riparian buffers, and water control structures for coastal counties. Each county is asked to provide a best estimate of unfertilized, unharvested cover crops that were planted in the last crop year for the 5 species that are listed. That is barley, oats, rye, triticale, and wheat. Several counties only report unfertilized cover crop implementation that was cost shared. Other counties report unfertilized cover crop implementation based on knowledge of typical activities by farmers in their area. For example, most farmers are planting an unfertilized, unharvested cover after tobacco, so they may estimate that 50% of the tobacco acreage estimated to be grown in their NSW watershed portion of the county, which could be the Tar-Pamlico Basin, the Neuse Basin, Falls Lake, Jordan Lake, had unfertilized, unharvested wheat cover. The goal is to provide the most reasonable estimate based on knowledge of farming in your county. If your LAC or your county staff does not have a good handle on the farmers implementing unfertilized, unharvested cover crops, moving forward with the most conservative estimate is the best choice. Each county is asked to provide acreage also of newly implemented buffer. Do not report any estimate for implemented buffer if you're not aware of any specific projects or actions that were taken to implement that buffer in the last year. So this is not an estimate of what you think was put in place. Only put in stuff that you know was put in place in the last year. Typically, the only acreage that we include in the buffer table is acreage from field borders that are directly adjacent to blue line streams or filter strips. Occasionally, there might be a farmland preservation project that's reported, which we can add into additional buffer establishment. For buffer, we cannot capture acreage that was implemented with any mitigation-related funding. Mitigation is already meant to be offsetting pollution elsewhere, and so the agriculture sector does not get credit for additional pollution reduction from implementation of any buffer-related practice if it's being used with mitigation funding, even though it's on agricultural land. Each coastal county is also asked to report acreage of newly implemented water control structures in the NSW basin. So that could be the Tar-Pamlico Basin or the Neuse Basin. All water control structures reported must be under an active maintenance agreement or have been inspected and found to be managed for water quality benefits. I know for some land smoothing practices, you can indicate that there's a water control structure on site, but those water control structures are not required to have a maintenance agreement with us, and that we follow up on and do spot checks on. And so we can't count land smoothing acreage as being under maintenance of water control structures unless there's some sort of inspection or field protocol that the district or county is undertaking to be able to count that towards your totals. So all water control structures that are older and are out of active maintenance agreements can be inspected, and they can be added in to county BMP totals to count for water quality benefits and nitrogen reduction. Those inspections must follow any field assessment protocol that the Division of Soil and Water has set up. So we do have that available if your district or county is interested in it. No district is required to go out and do this on older structures. I know it's a burden to be able to do that, and so that it's certainly not a requirement. However, we do have field protocol established and a tool available to guide this process if this is of interest or a priority to you and your district board or your local advisory committee. So just contact me, Allie Dinwiddie, if you are interested in that opportunity. All right, scrolling down here, you can see that the next page has information about ACSP BMPs that were implemented in crop year 2025, as well as NRCS BMPs that were implemented in crop year 2025. There's lots of comments and notes that I've included here to try and explain the data that's both being requested and also the data that's included in the table itself. Anywhere that you see a yellow box in this spreadsheet, you're being asked to fill out information for it. So in this example, we have a cropland conversion to grass contract, but we don't have an implementation date for that. So in this case, the question and the comment here is asking what was the implementation date for this practice? If yes, please specify a date for the contract that was implemented. You might see that in your county spreadsheet. You also might not see it. So it just is kind of dependent on the specificities within your county data, but there might be occasionally things like that. And this is based on the data that I can pull from CS2. Sometimes CS2 is not as smart and doesn't give us all the information that we need to have for different practices, or it says things were paid, but it's just because an RFP was submitted early and the practice wasn't actually implemented yet. So this is where it's helpful for local county staff to kind of help fill in those specifics so you can make sure that I am reporting just the BMPs that you all actually saw implemented in crop year 2025. All right, now we're going to go through the process of fully completing this BMP spreadsheet together. Again, at the top of the page, there's a list of instructions. I already went through that with my spiel earlier, but if you need to refer to these instructions to understand how to fill out this spreadsheet, then they are there for your reference and guidance. First table that we're going to look at is this unfertilized, unharvested cover table. So in this comment, I share information that there's cover crop acreage implemented using state and federal funding, which is available on page 2 within the spreadsheet, which there is. We've got cover crop implemented here with NRCS funding, and we also have cover crops that were implemented with state ag cost share funding as well. This comment also says that you may also review the cover crop acreage from the FSA crop report spreadsheet to inform a best estimate for unfertilized cover implemented in crop year 2025. Again, I'm not sure entirely about FSA's policy with regards to cover crops, whether they allow some fertilization or some harvesting. If they don't, then it might be appropriate to look at those for potential reporting in this table. If you cannot get local information on that, or you have no confidence in whether those cover crop totals are reportable under this table, then don't include them. That's okay. We'll go ahead and scroll down first to the page 2 here, which lists the state and federal cost shared cover crops. And we can see that in total, let's do a quick sum of all of these cover. That there was 727.32 acres of cover crops that was implemented with state and federal cost share funding in crop year 2025. You'll notice that this does not give me information that I need for the specific species types of unfertilized, unharvested cover for reporting through NLU. So this is where local advisory committees, local staff come in. You will need to review contract paperwork to apportion the amount of cover crop that was fully supported with federal and state cost share funding into the appropriate buckets that it should fall within for these 5 cover crop categories. So if a majority of that cover was in wheat, reported under wheat. If some of it was rye, reported under rye. Split it up as needed based on what you are aware of that was paid for. And you can find that information in the contract folder because that should be available to you. Let's say, for the purposes of this example, that 100 acres was grown in rye, and the rest was grown in wheat. So 627.32 was grown in wheat. And let's say that we chose that based on review of the documentation that we have in our contract folders. All right. Also, to go with this comment here, let's look at our FSA spreadsheet. So our FSA spreadsheet for our demo county, okay, there's 2 cover crops that were listed here. One was 18 acres of a mix, a cover mix, and another was 10,542 acres of a cereal or other grass for cover. Let's say that we do have confidence that this cover that was reported to FSA was unfertilized and unharvested, which case we can include it in our totals for our LAC for crop year 2025 reporting. And let's say that a majority of that cereal and other grasses was put into wheat. So we will add 10,542.34 acres to our 627 here. Which case we're reporting over 11,000 acres of cover in wheat. And let's say with this mixture that this was a brassica mixture, but there was also some oats in there, in which case we will add that 18 to the oats section of our spreadsheet. Sometimes, again, some counties estimate this based on, a knowledge of the tobacco growers in their area that are putting in a wheat after their tobacco crop and not harvesting and not fertilizing that wheat cover. So they might report that as cover crop for the year. It just kind of depends on your county and the best professional estimates that you can kind of put together in order to report out this information. Again, some counties go conservative. They only report what was cost shared on. Some incorporate FSA data and cost share data. And then some are even more broad with estimating what folks are doing without any federal data sets available, but just based on knowledge of what folks are actually putting in place due to relationships with farmers in the county. All right, moving down to the buffer table. You'll see here that for buffers, we primarily have things split out by width, in which case you will need to put different acres into their appropriate average width category. Also in our FSA data, we saw that there was CRP riparian buffer information, and 8.2 acres was apparently grown in the Neuse in 2025. Again, in reviewing this comment, we need to consult locally to understand if this was newly implemented acres or if this was just re-enrolled. Basically, if we're not able to confirm this was newly implemented, we can't count it towards riparian buffer totals because we might have accounted for it in the past, and buffer totals to date have been cumulative. So this does need to be identified on a county basis. You can't just rely on the FSA crop report information in order to to make a judgment call on this. You will need to do a little bit of investigating locally to figure out whether that was newly implemented or not. Let's say for the purposes of this demo that acreage was not newly implemented, it was just re-enrolled, in which case we are not including that in our buffer totals. We'll need to go down to our field border information that is in our ACSP and our NRCS tables. You'll notice that there's a comment here. Was any of this field border acreage implemented adjacent to a water body? If yes, record in the buffer table on page 1. Same thing for the field border acreage that was implemented with NRCS funding. Let's say that, yes, a majority of this field border acreage was implemented adjacent to a perennial stream. But let's say not all of it was. Let's say 0.1 acres was, but the rest, the 0.04 acres that was implemented on one side of the field, which is not abutting any surface water. In which case we should not report it as buffer. So for that, field borders typically average width is 20 feet. If it was a little bit larger, then report it under the appropriate width category. Well, let's say for the purposes of this example, we'll report our 0.1 acres in this 20-foot width category for this ag cost share funded field border. Again, sometimes I get folks saying, well, I think this was implemented, or I noticed this on a site visit that this was there. But if you can't confirm that it was newly implemented, we can't report it just because it might have been reported in the past. So we have to be conservative with what we're reporting, and we have to be able to document that this buffer was newly implemented and not captured in previous accounting that we have done. All right, let's say for the NRCS field border, none of this field border acreage was abutting any specific surface water, like a perennial or intermittent stream. So we can't count any of this towards a buffer. So we just have this 0.1 acres of 20-foot buffer resulting from the implementation of this field border with ag cost share funding. All right, moving down to water control structures. We scroll down to see the ACSP and the NRCS BMPs. We can see there's one water control structure implemented with federal funding and 2 with state funding. In the comment here, it lists what the affected acreage reported for those contracts were, which was 123.45 acres of affected acreage from that structure, or from those 2 structures. But for federal, we don't have that information, so we will need to consult with our federal colleagues, or our federal colleagues will need to share that information with us so that we can update this spreadsheet or add it in directly here. Let's say for the purposes of this that we've had that consultation, federal staff have shared that there's about 260 acres of cropland that was affected by this water control structure going in. So if we sum that up, 260 plus 123.45 from this acreage supported with ag cost share funding, we have 383.45 total affected acres that we need to report for water control structures for crop year 2025. So let's say that we've done that. I will note here quickly for water control structures, for land smoothing, sometimes we have ability for folks to indicate that there is water control structure on site that's being managed for water quality benefits. We cannot count those water control structures for credit because they might have been implemented in the past and we've already accounted for them, but mostly because they are not under an active maintenance agreement with us directly. And for water control structures, in order to get the nitrogen reduction benefit that is credited to that practice. They really need to be managed appropriately, and without a maintenance plan in place, there's no double check to make sure that that management is happening. So we cannot account for that in our nitrogen reduction crediting and reporting that we do for the agriculture rule unless there's additional field inspection work that is done that would support us to be able to add those totals in for land smoothing contracts or other types of contracts that have implemented water control structures in the past, but those structures are no longer under active maintenance agreements. All right, with this, we filled out our yellow boxes for the most part here. I'm going to go back and just add in zeros just to make it clear for things that we did not have any data to report on for those categories. So we just reported oat, rye, and wheat, unfertilized, unharvested cover crops, and a 20-foot buffer and a water control structure. Let's look down and see if we have any other yellow boxes. Okay, yes, we do have another yellow box down here in this table. The question is, was this implemented in crop year 2025? If yes, please specify a date for the contract that was implemented. Let's say that this contract was actually implemented outside of crop year 2025. So it was implemented by October 31st of 2025, in which case this information is good for me to know because I will not include this BMP, BMP value paid in this crop reporting year. I'll include it next year for reporting, but because it was implemented outside of our crop reporting year, I won't include it in the annual report. All right, looks like we've reviewed our state and federal cost share BMP data on page 2. We've reported best estimates for cover, for buffer, and for water control structures. We've also updated our implementation date for one of our contracts. And now all that's left is if we haven't reviewed our FSA crop spreadsheet, then we'll need to go and do that and update fertilization rates and manured soybean acres in there. But if we've already done that, then we can send Allie an email with the update that both of our county crop and BMP spreadsheets have been completed for this year. And with that, we have concluded the process for filling out the BMP spreadsheet for 2025 crop year reporting for NSW watersheds. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me, Allie Dinwiddie, and you can find my contact information in this spreadsheet here. With that, we'll conclude our video, and thank you for watching.